This is Palm Sunday, a day of celebration in our church. Lent is just about over, Holy Week is about to begin, but this is a day where we think of all the children a couple of millennia ago who are running around waving palm branches high and celebrating, and all the people that were with Jesus walking towards the gate, laying their cloaks out, celebrating, Hosanna, the King is here. Now imagine what that must have been like and the tensions that must have been there. This Holy Week, we're going to take a walk as if it's a personal walk for us. We're not just going to be spectators, we're going to be feeling and part of everything. Palm Sunday is a day rich with tradition. And we're reading this year from Matthew, who is always quoting from the Hebrew Scriptures, as we noted. Well, this year he quotes from Zechariah 9:9, where a psalm within Zechariah, a poem, says, "He comes on a donkey. There'll he be on a colt." An example of the couplet, the double comments where two lines parallel each other. But in Matthew, they actually took both lines literally. So we have this image, and cartoonists have no end of fun with this, where we have Jesus riding both a donkey and a colt over two of them because both of them are set up with blankets for him to ride. So that's the comical part of what's going on. The not quite so comical part is the politics that are so often lost on us. If I had a dime or nickel or a dollar maybe for every time someone said there should not be any politics in religion, and I want to tell people politics and religion have to go together. They are two forms of expression of the people, how they see justice, how they see themselves, and how they want the world to be. And this particular Sunday, we're looking back at a time when an oppressed people who had very few options, who were looking at the Roman might, Rome that crucified indiscriminately, who pulled families apart, who had no problem selling people into slavery if they didn't pay the family bills, a destructive force everywhere, and a promise of the Messiah, a desperation by the people to have change, to have this warrior they believed the Messiah to be. Or the Messiah was going to be a king, or some variants, or two or three Messiahs, or one who did everything. There was not a clear understanding of who the Messiah was going to be, only what was going to happen. And that was going to be the salvation of the people. And the people following Jesus, absolutely convinced he was the Messiah. And they headed towards Jerusalem with that knowledge. And they were coming in from the east. So they were coming down the road. There's a valley there. They were on the other side of the valley. They came across to go into one of the lesser gates close to the temple and coming in and celebrating. These are probably a lot of followers who had followed him from Galilee or from the outside area. Coming, celebrating, here's the king, here's the celebration, Hosanna, which means Lord save us. And all of that excitement comes into the city, and the city people are like, what? What's going on here? Who is this? They did not know why these people were celebrating over this humble man riding a donkey and a colt coming into the city in celebration with everybody waving around him. Now that's what's happening on the east. On the west, a very different experience is happening. There we have someone else riding into Jerusalem with equal fanfare, possibly with palm branches waving, but I highly doubt it. You'd have more flags and swords and spears and that kind of stuff waving because the Romans had arrived with Pontius Pilate leading the way. Passover is where this story of Holy Week is set. Now, it's very, very important for us to respect our Jewish siblings, that this is not a week where Christians pretend to do Jewish ceremonies. We should not be doing a Seder this week or having anything connecting us with the Jewish experience overtly. There are certainly some subtleties. I mean, these were all the same Hebrew people, and they certainly paid attention as time went on to the similarities that between those who followed the Pharisees and those who followed Jesus. But at this time, there were a group of people who were celebrating a feast of the unleavened bread that did not look like the seders that we have today. And they were all coming together because this is one of the 3 holy days, in fact, the most holy day, the holy time of pilgrimage to come into Jerusalem. It made the Romans nervous. They couldn't outlaw it because they'd already had a few rebellions going on, and at this point in time, the Romans were stretched really, really thin, and they couldn't actually put down every rebellion that was raised against them. So they decided to moderate it. The Sadducees were in collusion with the Romans, the Pharisees trying to keep balance, even though they were definitely leaning against what the Romans had to say, but they understood the politics of the day. And then the Romans coming in to assert their authority. They represented Caesar. They represented the king. So we have these 2 processions coming in to 2 very different sides of the city. One that would change the world, and one that thought they should have final say on everything. I'll let you decide who was who. But the tension was high. And that's where we are as we begin Holy Week. The children running around our churches this week are going to be beautiful and having fun, and the parades we're having, and maybe we'll have a donkey involved if we know some farmers who can do that. The branches that'll be waved high. All of that is right for us to celebrate. This is as high a day through the entire Lenten Easter season as we're going to get until Easter Sunday. But we cannot forget that the other procession was also coming into the city. This was a time of discomfort. This is a time of not knowing what was going to happen. Jesus had already predicted his death several times. It was an act of bravery for him to return to Jerusalem and come in and announce with all of his entourage that the king had arrived. It was a setup. It was going to be painful no matter how they did it. There was going to be countless numbers of dead. This was what the Pharisees feared. They wanted to shut down Jesus and his people as the perceived weaker group, and they wanted to get rid of them in as quiet a way as possible. That is how we proceed through Holy Week this year. The celebration that we're discovering, that we're experiencing on Palm Sunday, how do we make that more than just a superficial celebration? That's going to be our theme throughout Holy Week as we have a different reflection every day until Easter Monday. How do we make this something that we can experience? I was reading not long ago a story of a man who talked about his uncle reading the Passion story every year, and he would burst into tears whenever Jesus was killed. And the family would sit around awkwardly and they'd wait till he was finished. And then he'd dry his tears and he'd say, "It gets me every time." The rest of the church moved on. We are the rest of the church. We kind of moved on from the story. But this week, how about we bring it back? How about we make it personal? Not just the historical, what if you were there that we discussed last year, but what if this matters in our existence? That the entry of Jesus, the taunt, essentially, of Jesus entering the city on Palm Sunday, the showcase that no matter how great a force came in the West Gate towards the palace and stayed there, watching everybody, guarding every activity, overseeing what was going on in the marketplace. The taunt that there was something bigger, something better, that no matter what they Romans were eventually going to do, was not going to be enough to silence this group of rebel rousers, these groups of outsiders, these no ones, these nameless, often poor folks who had truth. How do we make that personal? Every one of us is going to have a different answer to that question. But how do we wave the palms of Palm Sunday and feel like it means something? That it's something deep in us that is responding. That we are not only witnessing what is going on, but that we are personally engaged in a statement that Christ is King, that we are more powerful than the world leaders, especially those who rely on lies and terror and dividing us from each other. That we, as the purveyors of Christ's message, are personally involved in making sure this message is shared by those who need to hear it. And at this point, that's a lot of people. Not the evil, destructive, God hates kind of garbage that popular media presents, but the actual message that there is nothing that stands between us and God, that everything around acceptance and inclusion is God's will. And it's our job, it's our call to make that happen for others. How do we internalize and personalize the message of Hosanna? God save us. Walk with us. Be with us. Stand in the face of danger beside us. We are here. We are waving our branches. We're going to share this message of absolute trust in God.